CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Kenyans went to the polls on August the 9th in a race that saw Deputy President William Ruto and opposition leader Raila Odinga running neck and neck. On August the 15th, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission declared William Ruto the winner with 50.49% of the vote. However, Raila Odinga rejected the results and stated he would be pursuing all constitutional and legal options available to contest the election. Now, as the country awaits the swearing in of a new president, one thing is certain. Whoever takes office has his plate full. With a battered economy and spiraling costs of living ravaging the country, the incoming president has urgent issues to address. This week on the program, we look at what lies ahead for Kenya's new president, what issues he has to address, and how to unite a divided Kenya. I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Well, joining me now to take a closer look at what lies ahead for Kenya's president-elect are from Johannesburg, Phumlani Majozi. He's an analyst in economics, political and global issues, and also a senior fellow at the African Liberty. In Nairobi, Patrick Gathara, writer, journalist, cartoonist, and political analyst, and Mule Musau, the national coordinator for the Elections Observation Group in Kenya. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Patrick, if I may start off with you, because the 2022 Kenyan election has concluded. William Ruto has been declared president-elect by the Electoral Commission. You observed this election from voting to the announcement. What did you see?
Well, I think it was one of the most transparent elections that Kenya has had. We saw all the results being put up on the public portal, so anybody could add them up and see who the winner was, and they seem to have been verified by independent observers that they at least were within what was announced, was within what was expected. So I'm quite proud that we went through this as Kenyans and that we ended up with an election that's really a step up from what we've had before.
Mule, as an independent observer, is this a step up from what Kenya has had before?
Well, from where we sit, because we have been observing elections since 2013, we have seen incremental gains in respect of how elections have been managed in Kenya. And just to give you an example, in 2013, the Kim's failure was at 55%. More than half of the Kim's failed. In 2017, it was 7.6%. In these elections, it was at 6%. So voting day operations, I think there's a lot of enhancement which has come through. The other, I think, big issue in this election is the fact that there was a level of transparency which is unprecedented in Kenyan elections in terms of the results management system, where the IBC was able to transmit election results through a public portal which was accessible by everyone.
Phumlani, your thoughts here, because you're watching this, of course, from South Africa, and you know how Kenyan elections have played out in 2017, 2013, and going back even to 2007. What is the international observation here?
Well, it's been quite positive. What has come out of the election. So, given where Kenya comes from, this is a step up, from the previous times. And from South Africa, there's been that, positivity toward the outcome. We think that the Kenyans have the opportunity to get their country back on track, to fix the fundamental issues that they are facing from the economic perspective, from a governance perspective, from the international relations perspective as well. So the view has been quite positive at an international level when it comes to this election in Kenya.
Patrick, I'm hearing a lot of positivity coming out of Kenya's election as compared to previous elections, but this has been a close contest. The two leading candidates were separated by about 2 percentage points. Opposition leader Raila Odinga has rejected that result. So what do you see playing out in coming days?
Well, Raila Odinga, as you note, has rejected the result, and it was a close result. But he hasn't presented anything publicly that would convince me that the results that were announced were fraudulent. It's important to just note that I'm basing my assessment on what was publicly available, the information both on the IEBC portal and what other observers have noted. I haven't seen any evidence of sort of systematic irregularities that would change the result that we have. So I think right now we are all expecting that Raila might file a case. He hasn't committed to actually doing that at the Supreme Court. But if he does, then hopefully we'll hear more about what he alleges happened. And then that might then, depending on the weight of that evidence, it might change minds as to the transparency of the elections. My one worry is in the wording that he used about challenging his outcome. He spoke of legal and constitutional means. I'm hoping that that means he'll go to the Supreme Court, because there are other legal and constitutional means he could use to challenge the outcome, which might include things like street demonstrations, mass action, or stuff like that, which we've seen in the past can really lead to heightened tensions and even violence.
All right. Mule, I do want to come to you on a slightly different question, because the Electoral Commission, though, announced that the voter turnout in this election was rather low at 65%, one of the lowest in Kenya's electoral history. Do we know the reason for this?
There could be a number of reasons. One, we know that there was a depressed youth participation in these elections, judging by the fact that in the first instance, they were unwilling to register when IBC did roll out a mass voter registration process earlier in the year. So young people did not participate very effectively. It would be interesting to see the numbers which came out in the actual election, but that's one thing, and that was widespread across. And I've talked to quite a number of people who indicated that they never participated, and this is the second lowest out of the last 4-5 elections. This is the second lowest after the 2002 elections, where we had 57%. So this is 65. Lower than the last two elections. It goes on to just show a level of fatigue, in my view, of the Kenyan voters with participating in elections, which have been very rigorous, which have been very protracted, and which have been disputed over the last three times.
Patrick, do you feel that there was a level of fatigue in this election this time around?
I think there was. I think that many young people did not see themselves reflected in the choices that were there. And there is a perception that, in essence, we're just going through a ritual where it's the same people who we are electing or the same choice on the menu. I think many young people are quite disenchanted with the political process as a whole, and there needs to be an audit, and for us to think about how more we can engage them, not just in voting, but also in the day-to-day, participating in the day-to-day decisions that are made by politicians and that then affect their lives. Then that might actually induce more of them to be or to come up to be part of the entire process.
So, Patrick, let me just come back to the likely scenarios that could happen here. You know, in the event that the election is upheld or nullified, what is likely to happen?
Well, if the election is nullified, I think the only option we have is to run it again. I don't think the Supreme Court has the option of essentially doing the IEBC's job and announcing somebody other than what the IBC has announced as the winner. Taking what we had in 2017, I think that would mean we've got 60 days essentially to organize another elections, and hopefully within that period we can sort out whatever problems that the Supreme Court can would identify. The other option is that it is upheld. And if it's upheld, then Ruto will be sworn in shortly thereafter.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to take a short break now. When we come back, we'll discuss some of the pressing problems facing Kenyans and how the incoming president may address them. To stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Still with me on the program, Pumlani Majozi joining us from Johannesburg, Patrick Gadhara and Mule Musau, both here in Nairobi with me. And before the break, we looked at the 2022 electoral process. Let's now take a closer look at how the incoming president may address some of Kenya's current problems. Pumlazi, you know, the outcome of this election, as we've mentioned before, with President-elect Ruto's 50.49%, versus his closest challenger, Raila Odinga's 48.85%, shows a rather divided country. How do you see an incoming leader dealing with this division? But also first, do you feel that this is a divided country as a result of that election?
Well, it is definitely, given the results, that it's a divided country. Now, the key challenge for President Ruto would be, how do you try and get the country to unite together in the first 100 days of his presidency? How do you try and unite a country that is divided, while at the same time pursuing the objective policies that will advance the economy? Kenya at this point is facing sort of big challenges around the economy, around the drought, around the public debt that is getting closer to 70% of GDP, of gross domestic product. So the president will have to ensure that while he tries to unite the country that is divided from the election, he also tries to make the case or pushes forward with the agenda that can address the socio-economic challenges of Kenya. And I must say that for President Ruto, the key will be to show stamina and courage and the sense of purpose as the president to move the country forward.
Patrick, how do you go about uniting a country while pursuing policy? I think that is going to be the key question. And of course, do you feel that this poll has shown that once again, Kenya is still quite divided, or that is just democracy?
Well, I think we shouldn't really overstate the scale of the division. Ruto is going to come in with a minority of the electorate having voted for him. You know, so it's 7 million out of 22 million registered voters. And it is a tiny fraction of the country as a whole. I mean, it's a country of 50 million, of whom only a seventh actually voted for him. So I don't think he can really claim a huge mandate to change things. But I think that if he was willing to widen his appeal to the rest of the country, to show them that it's not just going to be the people who voted for him who can expect to be classed as winners, that he can run an administration that recognizes that lots of people are quite suspicious, and I think with very good reason, about his background, about his history, the allegations of corruption, his charges of or his indictment at the ICC, you know, and allegations of involvement in electoral violence. You know, many people come at this very suspicious of him. During the campaign, we saw sort of the media and the civil society as well didn't seem very enthused by his candidature. So he's got to really reach out. And I think if he doesn't do that, if he sort of runs a triumphalist campaign, as we've seen some of his supporters sort of following up on, you know, sort of a triumphalist administration that seeks to impose rather than to engage, then we're going to have, I think, a bit of a rocky time going forward.
Patrick, though, how do you then widen the appeal, so to speak?
Well, I think the first is to acknowledge that you are a minority government. You have a support of only a small minority, and that you need to sort of speak to everybody else, to speak to their concerns. And I think that if he was to actually start implementing some of the things that he had said in his manifesto, so for example, around healthcare and eliminating out-of-pocket costs for people, I think that might then start to create a groundswell of support for the stuff that he does. But I agree with the previous speaker that he has a very short time within which to start showing that there are benefits that people can get, and I would say stay away from the rhetoric or any divisive rhetoric. Acknowledge that there are many people who are scared at the moment, there are many people who are suspicious at the moment, and make an actual point of reaching out to them in your speeches and in engagements to show that you actually understand why it is they are doing. They're afraid, and that you're willing to tackle the sources of that fear.
Mule, let's look at the source of a suspicion. And of course, this post-election period in Kenya has been pretty much stable and calm when compared to elections in 2007, 2013, 2017. So in which ways do you see this as beneficial to the incoming leader? Is this beneficial to the incoming leader?
Well, I think the fact Gadara has talked about the need for him to be able to come to terms with the reality of his government, which means he has to reach out to different entities. I think in the run-up to this election, one of the things which came through was the establishment of political coalitions, which I think have benefited both main camps in terms of garnering votes from across the country. We have had a quieter political environment, especially emerging from political parties where some of the violence that we have seen in the past, some of the conflicts that we've seen in the past was not there. And from what I'm seeing, even in the moment, we have seen a number of, there are indications that quite a number of parties are also jumping ship and joining the government. So if they can be able to accumulate a number of a critical mass of supporters on his side, and also reach out to the other side, because remember, one of the things that Raila Odinga was pushing on for before the election was the BBI, and within the BBI there was a seat called the seat of the official opposition. So if he could revisit some of those issues, which I think, as from a Kenyan point of view, they were gains, then perhaps we can be able to reach out to the other side, and they can be able to work together very well moving forward.
Patrick, how do you look at this quieter political atmosphere, though? Because barely a week after the election, it does seem that normalcy has returned, at least to the capital, Nairobi.
Well, the first thing is it's actually a good thing that elections aren't the cause of huge, large-scale disruption. There was disruption in the week that it took to count the votes and announce a winner. But that things are going to normal fairly quickly, I think, is a good thing. But I think it also speaks to the disenchantment that people have with politics in general. And that's my point. I think that's a bridge that Ruto needs to ford. That's where he needs to really engage, not just with political leaders who might feel that they've lost out, but really with electorates, really with constituencies, with people in general who feel that the politics works for politicians, doesn't work for them. People who think that politicians really get into this game to make money, to enhance their own individual prospects, rather than to look after the common good. He's been there for 10 years, don't forget, as deputy president, So he comes in with baggage, and he comes in with the legacy of what the previous administration has done. And so I think he's going to have to really work hard to overcome that before people can actually trust him.
So let's look a bit here, Pumlani, at what the incoming leader would expect, because there has been a lot of anger at the soaring cost of living. You know, the country has struggled as a result of the global factors like the COVID pandemic and the Ukraine-Russia conflict. So what are the most pressing challenges the new leader will have to deal with? What might delay quick solutions?
The very big one that is affecting the entire world is basically the widespread inflation, the rising cost of living. So that one will be the big issue for the president, because it will also determine as to how he responds, to it, as well as how he pursues his economic policies. And also the drought matter, no doubt, because the drought has affected Kenya's productivity, the way of work, and so on, contributing to food issues and all those issues. So those are the things that he has to expect. So those issues will be very fundamental for the president, and also the rising youth unemployment rate in Kenya that has basically has doubled from the official rate. So he will need to address those issues as well, put in policies that will ensure that the market thrives, business thrives, because the new president is largely seen in the international market as a pro-market president, a president who will come in and ensure that the economy is liberalized, and therefore the country can move forward and improve its economic growth.
Right. I know there've been a lot of promises made by both parties, Patrick. Both coalitions have made a lot of promises to the common man. So what should be the short-term and long-term priority? I mean, which issues do you feel must be dealt with rather quickly?
Well, I mean, I agree that the initial focus should be on the cost of living crisis. I think that bringing down the cost of food is something that he promised, and I think he's going to be held to account on that. I think his promises around healthcare and about improving in general the well-being of people, eliminating out-of-pocket expenses for people who go to hospital. Many Kenyans go bankrupt or are one disease away from bankruptcy or from poverty. So it's really important, I think, for him to focus on things that are basically bread and butter issues. It was very encouraging that the manifesto that they had put out wasn't full as other manifestos have been in the past, and also as Emilio's manifesto, if you have to look at it, of this big project thinking, and he actually eschewed that. The other important issue is going to be around corruption, So what will he do about that? He said he's going to empower agencies to go after the corrupt. It remains to be seen. I think it has to start with him, because the cases against him in court and against his running mate, are they going to be slowed down because he's president? Or are we going to, have a repeat of what happened with the ICC cases when they got into power, where they use their political power to actually as a shield against accountability? So if we actually see movement, on the prosecution of cases, and we have a properly articulated a plan to actually plug in the holes where money goes through, then I think people can again start building up confidence in his governance.
Mule, I want to get your thoughts here as well, because there have been, of course, issues that pre-election, had people changing their minds on which party to vote for. So what do you think should be some of the short-term priorities, the long-term priorities for an incoming leader?
From my point of view, Ruto and his deputy ran on a ticket of bottom-up. Their major area of focus was ordinary Kenyans, where they were saying they would be able to help them, be able to gain better livelihoods. And therefore, the bread and butter issues that Gadara has talked about should be among the top priority for the team that is coming to State House. He is going to have to contend, of course, with a very serious foreign debt crisis that we are dealing with. So even as he tries to handle the domestic issues, there'll be a lot of expectations from Kenyans who, because of the narrative that, of course, he drove, we'll expect returns within the shortest time, within the next 6 months. Remember, we are coming from COVID, we're coming from a situation, the global crisis that we have. So I think my opinion is that even as he comes to terms with how he's going to deliver on the bread and butter, he still also has to deal with the question of the debt crisis that will is already strangling the country as we speak. So it is how he now defines himself within the first 6 months that better settles Kenyans' nerves in terms of his presidency and his incumbency over the next 5 years.
So, Pumlani, you've talked about where Kenya stands globally with its international partners. And we have seen a number of heads of state, particularly from the region, issuing congratulatory messages to the president-elect. How do you see an incoming leader, though, engaging regionally and globally, particularly with the whole question of the significance of Kenya in the sub-Saharan region?
Well, we need to remember that Kenya is the East Africa's economic powerhouse. So it's a superpower in East Africa. And we are observing it. We are observing its election outcome with huge interest because Kenya plays a huge role in the African continent. So my expectations would be that the new president will have to sort of strongly engage on the issues of, for example, the Africa Free Trade Agreement. We'll have to engage on the matters of regional issues at the AU level, as well as the East Africa level as well. So I expect this president seems to be a statesman who is interested in the world, who wants to engage it. So going forward, I think Kenya will step up as to how it engages Africa and will contribute toward the advancement of the African continent. And I see some sort of strong push from the new president, where he will try and contribute toward Africa's nations coming together to solve the problems of security, the problems of political instabilities we see in the continent, many regional issues that need to be resolved by African leaders. So I think Africa can expect a president who is engaged from Kenya.
Patrick, your thoughts?
Well, I think the first thing is the election that we just had can be a template, I think, for countries around the region, if not around the world, for how you can actually try and carry out a really open and transparent system that engenders faith in the results of electoral systems. I think coming on the back of what happened in 2017 and the annulment of the election, I don't think if Kenya hadn't annulled it, that we would have seen Malawi do the same, for example. So there are people who do look up to Kenya, and I think this election does set us up very well in ensuring the path. I think when it comes to engaging with especially continental institutions, there's a lot of crow that Ruto will have to swallow. I think in the first term since in 2013, they really abused Kenya's position by trying to get the AU essentially to withdraw from the Rome Statute unless their cases were dropped to try and impose a position on the rest of the continent that they weren't really necessarily comfortable with. But I think how he carries on the continental front is really going to set the pace for what Kenya's position remains within the continent.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for being a part of this discussion and for your insights. But that's all we have time on this edition of Talk Africa. A big thank you to all our guests, Pumlani Majozi, analyst in economics, political and global issues, and senior fellow at the African Liberty. Patrick Gadhara, writer, journalist, cartoonist, and political analyst, and Mule Musau, national coordinator for the Elections Observation Group in Kenya. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation online through our social media handles on Facebook and Twitter. You can also catch the show on our YouTube playlist. Do keep the conversation going and join us again next week for more Talk Africa. For me, Beatrice Marshall, and the team here in Nairobi, until next time, it's goodbye.